for the drums.
So we're going to continue our conversation on totals, Tableau's totals functionality. So in the previous couple of videos, we talked about Tableau's total function versus the window functions. So kind of how totals work. We talked about in the second episode what Tableau has for built-in functionality for totals. And now we're diving into the first of a number of videos on custom totals. And this particular first episode is about custom totals using two worksheets. It goes kind of the simplest method of doing custom totals.
Okay.
All right. So kind of like why do we need custom totals? I alluded to it in the past one, just to kind of review on that. We have cases where we need an aggregation that's not supported by two past totals. And I'm going to switch over here to Tableau visualization, where I've got some different examples here. So in Tableau, that regular total is the aggregation at the higher level. And then we have two past totals to change that to something else like average, minimum, or maximum. Now, what if I want median or some other aggregation that's not here? That's a place where we would want to do some custom totals. In the case of table calculations, even though the total using options show up here, if I choose one of these, like maximum, nothing happens. It's not actually supported for table calculations. And then the same with our blended calculations here as well, that if I choose something like that, they don't work. The other place where they don't show up, or places where we want to customize totals, if we want this grand total to be something completely dynamic based on our data. I can manually change this, but I can't dynamically change it. And then in one last option here, if I go to the analysis menu, totals, show row grand totals here, I get a warning message saying Tableau cannot turn on grand totals for discrete measures because I have a discrete measure on rows here. So we'll have things like key performance indicator fields or other measures that we're showing here. We can't turn on totals there. And then the other option besides these others that I mentioned is maybe we have a calculation where the total is going to use a completely different formula from what we're having, or as I'm going to demonstrate here, an example using a subset of the data. Two past totals not supported for table calculation or blended calculation. Grand total being a dynamic calculation, and this grand totals for discrete measures that we can't turn on, whether that's for rows or columns. So a lot of different use cases for this. And so in terms of doing this, we've got a few different methods here. There's putting two worksheets on a dashboard, which we're going to go through in this video. There's also doing a multiple axis crosstab. So this is where we have multiple green or continuous fields on columns and laying something out. We'll do a video demonstrating that. And then there's the self-unioned or replicated data, which we'll do in a video, and then assorted custom calculations to detect total cells, which are where we can get really fancy with those, and that's where it can take multiple videos to do. So we're going to be pretty complete over this series in doing this, and we're going to start out with the simplest one, and we'll take some time in each of the videos to talk about pluses and minuses of each one.
You know what I notice here on your slide, Jonathan, is that this is almost like a progression of the first thing that we might be inclined to try when we're maybe a little bit newer to Tableau, on down to what is possible with a bit more skills under our belt, a bit more complexity. So,
yeah, with 3 and 4, you're
Yep.
getting into data engineering and complex table calculations.
And here we're just
Hmm.
kind of working with two worksheets.
Yep. Yep. Making this as straightforward as possible.
Yeah, it would certainly be my first inclination, um, as
Hmm.
someone who may not have been exposed to some of these other methods. If I need something different, I'm going to create a new worksheet for it.
Yep. Yeah, and that's we'll put a link in, but my very first grand totals blog post was this method on how to do it. So we're reaching back to when I was learning Tableau, how to do this. So let's jump in with this method. So switching back to Tableau here, this is what we're going to build out. So I've got a dashboard here. Where my total is only including the top end values. So if I update my top end to 5, the total updates. So it's just a subset of the data. And also as I'm updating that top end, it's 9 now. And the title of the total is this header is also updating. And this is also responsive to the different filters in the view. So whoops, filtered out everything. So here's purple. Here's orange, there's adding blue and everything. So where we start with when we're going to use this two worksheets method to keep everything moving along and same as much as possible is build out what I call the detail sheet, which is that what are the rows that we're going to display, whether it's by, in this case, in this simple data, color, region, size, or individual row IDs. Whatever that makes sense for you, whatever filters that you're needing on the view, have them here. So get all this layout done, working the way you want. And then what we'll do to start out our total sheet is to duplicate this sheet. So that way we're preserving the filters, we're preserving as much as the layout as possible as we're doing it. I've created my top end set already. I'll just drop that in. So now this is 9, this is 3. So just kind of validating that this is doing what I want, because as soon as we're getting into the space of two worksheets, we want to make sure we're keeping everything in sync with our interactivity. And then because in this case, I just want to sum up the value of my filtered data, and I only want to see one mark for it, I'm going to remove row ID from rows. So I'll just drag that off. There's my value of 81. Now I need that header for the total and to make it dynamic. And in this case, I'm just going to use a type in calculation. So I'll double click on rows here and then start building out a little string, top plus, and I need to convert my top end parameter. I'll drag that into here, plus total. For my title, hit enter, and there's my header here, and I can just validate as I change that top 5, top 4, everything's still updating. Let's just rename this to my top and title sheet.
I notice here that you're using an ad hoc calculation just by double clicking on rows in order to add those labels in front and back. Is there a reason that that's your preference for that method, or it's just kind of a style thing?
For me, one of the things I really like about the type in calculations is when I have a calculation that is specific to a worksheet and I'm not going to be using it anywhere else, then I don't have to be clogging up
Right.
my list of fields over here in the data window with all of these calculations that are only applicable to individual worksheets. So with that, we will go to the dashboard where I've already started it with adding my detail sheet, laying out some of my filters and my different containers and everything. I have in my layout, I'm using containers here because I'm kind of old school that way with Tableau. So I have a container for where I want to put in my top end detail and total sheets. So in this case, it's a vertical layout, so it's a vertical container, and I will drag that in and drop it in there. And so here that is, and now we're into the formatting part of this exercise. So I will hide the title on this sheet because I don't need it. I will hide the field labels for rows. I will then right click on this and turn off show header. I need to get the spacing right, and I made this simpler on my detail sheet by using fit width. So I will do the same down here at the bottom of fit width. So there we go with that. So this all looks good. We still have kind of this extra spacing between these two. So I can remove that. I can, on my top end total sheet, go to layout. And this gets into what I call the fiddly formatting pieces of just, it's a lot of little mouse clicks and moving stuff around. So I set that to 0 on my vertical spacing. So now they're really close to one another. On my top one, I'd already changed that to 0. So there it's pretty close. And just to move my mouse off of here, we can see there's kind of more of a header there, and I could futz with it some more to make that work. And now just to validate, as I'm changing my top N, that is all updating as I would expect based on these different filters and so on. And because we're in all in one layout container, as this top end detail sheet is shrinking, this is now moving up to be right at the bottom of it.
Right, so it's that vertical layout container that is having the total sort of follow up and always hug the bottom of the detail sheet.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the basics of this method.
Now, you've pointed out a couple of times that that total sheet is responsive to the same filters that you have in your detail sheet. And you duplicated the sheet originally so that you can make sure that those filters apply to both. I found conditions, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, where sometimes that detail sheet is intentionally just like top 5 of something, but we actually don't want some of those top end filters to apply to the total. Say, for instance, we're looking at a country breakdown. The total might be a global total, and we really only want to see the top 5 to 10 countries, or we want to see the top 5 to 10 products in a list to keep the view compact, but the total should still be the total across all products. So what I like about this method is you've got complete control over whether that filter should apply or should not.
Yeah, that's very much an advantage to this, that in this method, we have 2 completely different worksheets. Here we have a detail sheet and a top end total sheet. Let me change the title to total there. Or we'll use the French. And we have with 2 worksheets, we have 2 filter shelves. And so, like you were saying, we can have them be completely separate. And in this case, I have this scoped filter that applies to multiple worksheets for color, and that's applying to both sheets, but this top end filter is only applying to one sheet, but not the other.
And as Robert suggests, you could swap and you could apply to the first sheet, but not the second. You could choose.
Yep. Any mix. And so with just to kind of show some other examples of this in action and talk about some of the issues here, I set up another worksheet where I have that value KPI here. And in this case, if I go to the analytics pane, I say I want to drag out a row grand total, and I get that cannot turn on grand totals for discrete measures. Then I can do the duplicate, rearrange some fields, add some header information. Now I have a total sheet, and then I can do the drag and drop to build out a dashboard that has everything together on it. On a side-by-side sheet is a way to do this. In this case, there's a couple of challenges I want to point out. One of the things with Tableau is that when we're laying out worksheets inside a container, Tableau forces a 1 pixel border. So it's maybe hard to see on the video here, but there's a little white line going down here that's this 1 pixel wide space between them. And sometimes we can avoid that by, instead of using layout containers, we can start using floating layouts to rearrange everything. But then we're into all the extra effort of floating layouts in dealing with that. The other thing I want to point out is, and this goes back to my print layout days, the region, value KPI, large, medium, small, they're all centered vertically in a certain way. The region total is not. It's on a different vertical center. And we could start futzing with ways to make this region total field have the same vertical center here in assorted ways, but then that just creates extra effort for this to worksheet method.
Yeah, it's that fiddly formatting you were talking about a minute ago.
Yes.
There's a lot of that in here, I can tell already.
And that I would say is one of the downfalls of taking this method is I see a lot of people come to my office hours and they're tinkering with the totals, and many times there's various columns. They may have a crosstab of like 8 or 12 columns, and getting everything lined up to be just right when you're trying to juggle 2 sheets is sort of the pitfall of taking this approach.
Yes, very much so. And then there's one other pitfall I want to talk about with this before we wrap up here. And this is with, we may have really tall or really wide sheets that are beyond the screen. So here I've set up a detail sheet. There's a row for each subcategory, and it scrolls off the edge of the screen. Then if I'm doing this kind of, I want some total that's a different way. So here I've built one out that's the median of the values as a total sheet. And I put them side by side in a dashboard. Now I have 2 scroll windows here. And these are independent scrolling. And there's people like Luke Stanky and the Flurlich twins and Lindsay Betzendahl and others who've all come up with ways of solving this scrolling issue within Tableau, and we'll link to the videos. But then those are getting into this kind of fiddly formatting conversation. They're just adding that much more complexity to the view.
You kind of want to use this method when you can take both sheets and fit to the entire view, and just let them fit in a fixed dashboard size. It could be also that the automatic dashboard sizing behaves funnily, not happily with different monitor sizes. So you kind of want to use this 2 worksheet method when you have the ability to control the size of both worksheets and just wet it and set it and leave it where it is.
Yeah, so to just kind of go through a little review of how to do this. You build your detail sheet, duplicate that so you can preserve your filters, build out your total sheet, put everything on a dashboard, and then get into that formatting. So in one sense, it's that simple, and we need to watch out for filtering and sorting across the sheets, scrolling issue that we talked about. And then the other piece is if we want subtotals, this method doesn't really work because subtotals are effectively inserting worksheets in the middle.
Yeah, and what I've run across is if you need multiple subtotals, say you've got something like a P&L, a profit and loss statement, where you've got different sections and different subtotals, and you need them all formatted and tabbed and indented differently. Often what people end up with is instead of 2 worksheets, it's like 6 or 10 or more. Yep. One for each of those subtotals and one for each of those subsections. And it can become a hairball pretty fast. And I think the only way to solve that is with, more data engineering. But, what I like about this approach that you have shown is that it's very approachable. I mean, this is something that almost anybody who recently picked up Tableau can do as a solution, even without getting into those more advanced methods, what we'll talk about on later episodes, I like simple. I still like simple.
Yeah.
And I would say the one place to keep an eye out is when it stops becoming simple, right? So if you wind up in that P&L approach where you have a worksheet for every section of the P&L and another worksheet for the total, and now you've munged like 14 or 18 worksheets together into the dashboard, that's no longer simple. And Tableau has to parse all of that XML before it can even begin to render the view. And so one kind of side consideration, every time you add a new worksheet into the dashboard, you're slowing things down because it has to parse all the XML, think about how to fit all those sheets together, then begin to render the view, and that's going to slow stuff down. So nice advantage here is that it's simple. And when it stops becoming simple, that then is your feedback that maybe you've reached sort of the boundary of the utility of this particular approach.
Yep. Yeah. So to what you said, Robert, I think this is it's a great method that pretty much anybody can do, and it's got limits.
Yeah.
Going to what Keith said. Yep. Oh, all right. Well, thank you both.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Looking forward
Thank
to the
you.
next one.
All right. Great.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye, all.
Bye.